The rise of threats against schools has been on the rise across the nation, not just here in the Houston area. In Florida, an 11-year-old boy was arrested for making violent threats against students at his school.
And now experts are raising awareness to the dangers of making school threats and the long-lasting impact that it can have on their records. Joining us now is Dr. April L. Peters-Hawkins from the University of Houston. Good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning. So first of all, how do you see the recent rash in school threats? How does that impact their learning environment? How does that impact them academically and emotionally before we talk about their long-term record?
Well, there's so many implications here. I mean, students, these kinds of threats disrupt the learning environment. They impact individual students in terms of their own fear for their safety in schools. It certainly impacts teachers' ability to settle classes down and then continue with instruction. So there are a lot of implications there.
Dr. Hawkins, what strategies have you found effective for maintaining that sense of safety and calm in schools during these types of issues and concerns?
I think a couple of things can help address that. So the administrators having a plan and a protocol that teachers can follow in a situation like that, having drills so that students are prepared in the event of an actual event that happens is helpful. Talking to students about their feelings, about situations that have happened or conflicts that they've engaged with other students is helpful on the front end and certainly on the back end. In the during, it's really just making sure that there's a plan in place that everyone is aware of. And I think also school resource officers can be an important help in a situation like that in terms of keeping things calm, letting everyone know that things are under control, and giving clear communication to students and the administrators.
What would you like to talk to parents about these disruptions and about this? You know, when we hear about these threats happening nationwide, then you kind of become a little bit numb to it. So what would you like parents to hear from you today?
I'm sorry?
We had a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you start over?
Sure. As a parent, I had this conversation with my children this morning. We talk daily. I think parents should talk daily with their children about what has happened in school, about not just the academic day, but socially what's going on, because socially, the social events of the day are so important in students' lives. So that's something that parents can key in on. And then making sure that they're aware of what children are bringing to school, like physically in their backpacks, but then also helping them to be in communication with the school to make sure that the school is aware of any conflicts that remain unresolved amongst students.
Yeah, you know, those are really great points. As you were talking and asking that question, it dawned on me, you know, as a society, as a culture, we sort of have become numb at times because it's so prevalent in headlines, right? But this isn't a time for us to lower our guard. And I know these are difficult conversations to be having with your children, and those conversations will look differently depending on your child's age. Any other suggestions, Doctor, when it comes to having these types of dialogues with them?
Sure. I think, you know, your children don't always want to talk to you, right? So not taking no for an answer, really probing in a way that's not trying, but really having conversations about what's happening with them at school. Knowing who their friend groups are, knowing when there are conflicts is really important. Being in communication with their friends' parents sometimes can be helpful as well to making sure that you know what's going on with your child as a parent.
Yeah, and I do think that has been dropped over the last few decades. You know, when we were growing up, it was like our parents kind of knew all of our business and knew whose house we were hanging out with, and they might go to that house and check it out themselves. And now there's so many barriers there, you know, like we don't really know who our kids are talking to. I think because of the development of the internet, you know, and that's kind of kept us out of the loop in their private lives. You can touch a little bit on that too, but I also want to talk about your research on equity and vulnerable student populations, and how do you think that this, or why do you think that this is affecting students from marginalized backgrounds more?
Well, I think there are probably a number of implications in terms of what happens with students with marginalized backgrounds. Back to the parents for one quick second. I think you're right about parents having a different, children are different, the environment is different, and this whole notion of desensitization is really important to make sure that students don't think that's another school, that's not my school, that's not my community. And it really hit home yesterday with so many incidents in this area. In the greater Houston metropolitan area. In terms of what happens with marginalized students and issues of equity, I think certain schools are under-resourced, so there are not enough counselors to take on engaging with students to understand what's going on. And so when we have those equity issues where we don't have the funds or the resources to provide students with outlets to express themselves and to understand what's going on, then we have to react to sometimes these issues on the other end of things. And so these are real concerns that schools have in terms of being understaffed, in terms of, being under-resourced. And so I think these are things that districts continue to grapple with all the time.
I'm going to add one more question very quickly because we are running out of time. But I know that you said school resource officers could help with this. Whatever happened to talking about putting metal detectors in schools? Is that of any value to our local schools?
I think these things can be on a case-by-case basis with, I would hesitate to recommend anything writ large. But I would say that, other devices that help detect certain kinds of, objects could be helpful. Some districts have the clear bag policies that could be helpful. I know the district in Georgia recently had devices that teachers could use to summons law enforcement officers. I think those are all helpful. I think we have to get out of the mindset that this can't happen here, that it can actually happen anywhere, and we've seen that. And so we need to be really creative and thoughtful about addressing that and providing the resources that schools and teachers need in order to address these issues.
Yeah, Dr. April L. Peters-Hawkins, thank you for joining us this morning. That was really helpful information. This is a subject that I unfortunately don't think it's going away anytime soon. So we'll definitely check back in with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.